Jonathan and I are curious to know where you guys come from, kind of just learn more about your perspective and understanding, and what you come to this workshop with already. So I can start with myself. Again, my name is Rime. I'm a youth mentor at MLSC Launchpad. And in terms of sport, I've played sport. I grew up playing sport. And yeah, any courageous soul want to piggyback off that?
I'll go next, Rime. My name is Jonathan Hood. I run a nonprofit organization called Ahead of the Game, youth mentoring organization. So I've been working in the youth mentoring and youth sport space for quite some time. That organization is 10 years old this year. I'm currently finishing my PhD at the University of Toronto and work with a lot of young people and families.
I'll go next. Grand Rising, my name is Brittany Habib, and I was on the Canadian National Gymnastics team. And I was the only Black girl on the Canadian National Gymnastics team, which was really difficult and really challenging because there was a lot of racism. There was a lot of discrimination. Being a predominantly Asian and Caucasian sport with no other young Black girls, it was very challenging to feel accepted. So with that, I've created a space for young Black girls, which is called Girl Powered. This is a gymnastics and dance program really meant to build the self-esteem and the self-love for young girls who identify as Black, and really incorporating culture and love and empowerment to build these young girls and to create that safe space for young girls to do gymnastics and to do dance.
I can go next. My name is Nabil Rahman. I work for the town of Oakville as a community development specialist in the rec and culture space. And these last couple of months, I've really been putting in a lot of overtime hours, just watching the NBA playoffs to learn as much as I can about those sports and integrate them into my work setting. And now with Euro 2020 championships, so really putting in a lot of work to ensure that the sports and the things we're offering are inclusive. But I joke, of course, but I think to everybody's point, sports can play such a huge role in impacting how a person belongs and how a person feels connected to the community, how a person feels included, and even their own sense of identity, that we often overlook the impacts of not being inclusive. You hear stories so many times of how fans treat players, but at the same time, how young people growing up in spaces where they want to be able to express themselves through sports, through creative means, and how not having a structure in place that is anti-racism, anti-oppressive can really prevent people from realizing their true potential and often alienating them to activities that they would otherwise excel at.
Thank you, Nabil. You could also type in the chat if you're a little shy or don't want to speak up too loud this morning. We still love you.
Yeah, so Chris Penrose, I'm with Layup Youth Basketball. My role is Director of Programs and Operations. So just on really trying to be that glue between like our infrastructure and our operational side of things and programming and the team. And we just have a point of view on basketball as, looking at it as the culture of basketball that includes social justice, it includes the creative industries, it includes tech, entrepreneurship, the future of work. All those things really are naturally and organically connected to basketball. And just from personal experience, that makes a lot of sense for me because I've been involved in the creative industries and the sports world. I always look at it like if one person could have been just one-dimensional in basketball, that would be Kobe Bryant. But the first thing he did after retiring was win an Oscar for his writing. So if he's that multi-dimensional, as obsessed with the game as he was, none of us are just sport. So that's kind of like the point of view in the organization as well.
Thanks, Chris. And we see you have your assistant with you. Thanks for bringing your assistant on there and the commentary they're providing. We appreciate that.
She's the boss. I'm the assistant, actually.
Okay. All right. Anyone else want to share?
I can go next. So I'm Laura Wilson. I'm with the Ontario Para Network. I'm the executive director there. We focus on building inclusive sport opportunities for people with physical disabilities. My goal is to create opportunities for participation that are fully inclusive. Wheelchair basketball, for example, is a fully inclusive sport. Able-bodied players can play. People with physical disabilities can play. We're focused on really creating those opportunities from grassroots right through to high performance Paralympians. I am of Indian descent, from Asia, India, not Canadian, native Canadian. My sports that I'm passionate about are hockey and golf. And certainly I have often felt like I do not belong in those sports. And so my goal is really looking at inclusion from more than just a disability lens, but really looking at a fulsome definition of inclusion and building that into our programming.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. So anyone else want to go? All right. In the spirit of inclusivity, we want to give everybody a chance to share their voice. And we also want to give everybody a chance to not share their voice. It's up to you, right? So we respect that either way. I've run a lot of workshops, programs, and I've done a lot of speaking online. And I like to bring the same kind of energy and engagement when we're online that we would try to have in person. And although it's not exactly the same, we can get close. And one way is to celebrate each other. So typically when we're together, we celebrate by clapping, right? But sometimes you don't know what's going on in the background. You see one square in someone's home or their office or wherever they are. And so instead of clapping, you may be waking up grandma beside you, right? We just go like this, and we'll call that the spirit fingers, or some of the dancers, maybe even Brittany is that's familiar to her. So when we have something that like touches you in a positive way, you want to clap or you want to say yeah, or you get an aha moment, we just want you to go like this. All right, can you practice it with me right now? There we go. All right, see, like automatically some of you just started smiling, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about anti-racism and building anti-racist practices into youth sport. And from what we've heard and seen already, we've got a pretty diverse group here. And I love to see the diversity. One of the biggest things I think in order to be anti-racist is to be diverse. Everybody has a story. And I always say there's a story behind the story. And it isn't until you give someone an opportunity to share that story when you will get a deeper understanding of who they are and even some background into why they do some of the things that they do. So what we're going to talk about today is heavily revolves around narratives and understanding the narratives of different people at different times, so that we can build anti-racist principles into sport programming. Now, a lot of organizations say we're going to kind of ask young people, what do you want? What would you rather? What do you this? What do you that? But I find that to be heavily challenging, because at certain ages, you just don't know what you need. And it's a little bit unreasonable to me to ask someone what they need or what's best for them when they are not at that maturity level yet. When I was 13 years old, I thought I knew everything. And if you asked me what I needed, I would have probably told you basketball and some Air Jordans. I didn't quite know exactly what I needed to get to where I was? And the real answer was I needed mentorship. I needed support to grow myself, and I needed a network to help me to get to where I wanted to go. So we're going to walk you through some of our perspectives on that. We're going to make this very, very open. So feel free to interject with your questions in the chat. We're both pretty well versed in kind of facilitating and keeping our eye on the chat. And if you want us to like call on you to say something out loud, there is the raise hand function at the bottom right of your screen. There are reactions. There's raise hand function there, and we will get to you when there's kind of a break in the presentation. So we want to make this interactive. We want to have what we call a power station, a powerful conversation. So Rime is going to share a bit about himself, and then I'm going to walk you through some of my research in this area. And then he's going to outline how that research would directly apply to him. And while we're doing this, we'll more near the end, we'll talk about how it directly relates to you all and the positions that you have. So go ahead, Rime.
Perfect. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that. Jonathan, I'm gonna give you one of these. One of these. Perfect. Okay. Hi, thank you, everybody. My name is Rime. I'm 20 years old. I'm in my third year, York University. I'm studying political science and English. But before that, I guess we'll start with kind of my life. So I was born in Scarborough, born in Toronto, into a Eritrean household. Both of my parents were immigrants. And so with that, we found ourselves in, I was born into Toronto community housing. I was raised at Midland and Danforth at 30 Gordon Ridge with my older brother and also my younger brother. So I'm the middle child. From a very young age, my parents thought it was very important to put us in sport. And because we were Eritrean, culturally, we all play soccer. So soccer was the first thing we were put into at the age of 3. I started soccer, and then with that, I also started school. So I started soccer, and it was a really fun time. That's all I really cared about when I was young, probably until I was about 17 when I stopped. But I learned a lot while playing soccer. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about I learned about empowering myself, and I learned how to do all that with the support of my coaches and things like that. I also, again, went to school in Scarborough. I went to school at St. Mary Grady Catholic School. And the interesting part about my academic experience is that my mom made it a point to never put me in schools in my neighborhood. And the reason I share that is because it's pretty interesting how my mom, being an immigrant, kind of realized that although our neighborhood was our community, there wasn't a lot for a young Black boy in that neighborhood that was positive, unfortunately. And so with that, we were sent to schools relatively far. And in high school, I went to Senator O'Connor College School. I'm not sure if any of you know that. It's just around VP and Ellesmere. And I flourished, and I'm extremely grateful for it. However, it is interesting to see the way my parents kind of realized that, and how they were, how they acted in making sure that my academic career supported, or where I was put academically supported, my life trajectory. And so with that being said, that's who I am. And Jonathan, if you have any questions, feel free.
Yeah, so I want to invite everybody to take a real kind of critical look at the story that Rime just shared. What are some kind of key words that came up? You can type them in the chat, you can unmute them. It all depends on your own comfort level, right? And I'm just going to keep talking, and when stuff comes up, when you interject, I'll give you some space. So he talked about not being from, his family not being from Canada. So what does that mean now as a new immigrant? What does that mean in terms of the conditions by which they came to Canada? What does that mean in terms of where they could have lived, right? He did mention housing, right? So what does that mean about things like income level? What does that mean about living conditions? What does that mean? And we're just thinking, right? We're not going to say, well, this means that and this means that. We're just dreaming possibilities, right? We're just thinking of different reasons and we're postulating different explanations, right? Nothing is solid and concrete. We're just thinking here. What are some things that may have influenced him and how he looked at himself? His siblings, his family situation. What was noted about where he went to school? Why would someone say that? I'm going to send you to school in this area rather than this area. What does that say about environment, right? So these are the things that we need to listen for in order to best serve the demographics that we are serving, right? There's a phrase that says, give a man a fish, you feed them for a day. Teach someone to fish, and you feed them for a lifetime. And if we reflect back on what Rime shared, he shared how sport helped. Is this the case for everyone? Does sport always help? Under what conditions do sport have we heard of, have we experienced, or have we read and researched does sports help? And under what conditions do sport may not help, may bring down, may tear down, may recreate certain structures? What does that all have to do with power, right? So teach someone to give someone a fish, you feed them for a day. Teach someone to fish, you feed them for a lifetime. Last week was kind of part one of this, and I used the same analogy to outline the approach to development that sport programs take, right? They say, okay, we're not gonna just give them marginalized youth, resources or opportunities. We're going to teach them how to be resilient. We're going to teach them life skills. We're going to teach them how to be better, right? And at first, that seems like the right thing to do. If I teach you how to play basketball, you can be the next LeBron James, can't you? Right? But if we really take a critical look at that, what does that mean if we're taught something? What does that mean if we're taught through a Eurocentric lens versus an Asian lens or an African lens? What does it mean to be taught? Are we going on a journey? Are we going through an experience? How do different cultures teach or impart wisdom and knowledge on each other? Is it just enough to teach me something? If I can fish, does that mean I'm going to have fish for a lifetime? Or does it mean that I may know the skill of fishing? I still need a rod. I still need bait. I still need to know where to fish. I still need mentorship and guidance. What if I fail the first time I fish and don't catch any fish? How am I going to bounce back? I need support. I need people to introduce me to a network of fishermen who can guide me along the way, right? Fishermen and fisherwomen, people that I can identify with. So in my work, I use the term sidelined when referring to marginalized youth. It's a sports analogy. In the sideline, you're not in the game and playing. You're still in the game, but you're on the sides. You don't have everything to participate fully as everyone else does. So here are a few stats of what we mean by marginalized or sideline. When we talk about those terms, we're looking at socioeconomic status. And some of the outcomes of a lower SES are less likely to perform well in school, more likely to experience physical and mental health issues, and more likely to engage in delinquent behavior. Now, some of the other outcomes is systemic outcomes are overrepresentation of minority youth in the criminal justice system and in the care system, higher rates of dropout, poor mental health. So a lot of research looks at these outcomes and says, oh, this is what's happening in this group, and now we need to fix it. But they don't really get down into the depths, into the core of why. Why is it that household income is related to high school dropout? Why is it that poor mental health is related to overpopulated areas? Can we get a little bit deeper? And typically, when we're exploring these issues, it is done through a PYD, positive youth development lens, SFD, sport for development lens, and then resources, right? And the old approach would be, okay, you know what, in the case of Indigenous people, we come over here, we're going to take your land. Well, now we're saying we're sorry, we've taken your land. Here, we'll section off a piece of the land for you and give it back. Then we'll give you money, we'll give you our teachers, we'll give you residential schools, and we all know the outcomes of those, right? So sometimes the old approach was, let's give them resources, then they'll be fine. That doesn't work, right? The PYD and SFD approach is, let's build their skills and they'll be better. Let's teach them how to fish. Let's give them the skill of being able to do something, and that will be enough. And I question, is that really enough? When we talk about development, we're looking at from childhood to adults, physical, cognitive, emotional, social, and behavioral. So if we're working within the sport for development, in the sport for development realm, are we paying respect to those 5 areas of development? So now, this is a challenge. There are youth who are born into very precarious situations, most of which they cannot control. How do we actually come up with programming that will help them grow and develop, and at least have the tools, the skills, the support, and whatever else is necessary to be competitive? And by competitive, I mean to be a top candidate for jobs, to have access to finances, to have access to housing, and those kind of little things that you need to live. So when we critique the current programs, I've said, and many other scholars have said, some of these programs are just reiterating colonizing practices, imperialistic practices, and even capitalist practices, because rather than fully provide them with a 360-degree approach to amending things that were taken away so that they can move forward, I think these programs add one dimension and don't fully move towards development, not taking heed of the systems that put people into the margins. Anyone want to comment, question, add?
Are you able to hear me?
We can hear you.
Beautiful. I just want to say I absolutely agree with where you're coming from. And I think it's so needed. And I do find that when it does come to programming, it is extremely one-dimensional. And in my opinion, that is not okay, because we need to create these hubs that are, in a sense, holistic. And I'll talk from my perspective, just in regards to the importance of understanding self and culture. And there are not enough spaces, specifically Black spaces, for these young youth to really become their best selves as an entity. When they do go to like soccer practice, the coaches are very, this is about the sport, this is what you're going to be learning how to do this and do that. But what we need to do is create spaces for these beautiful young kids to understand their entire self, not just sport. We need to build them from the ground up and allow them to be prepared for life. And so many coaches don't necessarily even think about that, because it's just about trying to build the next superstar. And realistically, one of how many is going to be making, that national team or going to the Olympics or doing all these different things. So they're not thinking about that. And obviously, in most cases, it's about making the money as well. So they're not thinking about the entire entity of the child. And so for me, it's just, I'm really passionate about that, because that was, I lacked that growing up. I mean, being a national gymnast, training 35 hours a week in a space that was no Black people, it affected me tremendously. And I had to do a lot of self-work to rebuild myself and understand self. And I wasn't able to do that until my early 20s, mid 20s. So it took a really, really, really long time for me to really find who I was. And so creating this space is now, I'm just trying to fix those pocket holes,
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. Brittany, I have a question.
Sure.
What could one of your coaches, say who were not Black, what could they have done to help you in your journey of growth, development, and even identity formation?
That's a really beautiful question. One of the things they could have done was educate themselves on Black culture, my Caribbean and African heritage, educate themselves on that so that they would be able to relate to me and understand characteristics that I needed to strive.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you so much for sharing that. Is that a hand? That's it. Oh, that's the, there we go.
It's a little bit of both, I suppose. No, I think that's a really great insight, Brittany shared. I just have a question. I love your second bullet point about sport functioning as a way to either integrate or assimilate people into like particular social order, right? And it's just a trend that I personally noticed. I just wanted to put it out to you and the group that we are institutionalizing play so much sometimes that inevitably to access it, you will need to have resources, right? And I think the unstructured component of play or sports or youth programming in general is like what really brings people and makes it accessible. And so I was just putting it out there. How can unstructured spaces, unstructured programming, where it's not about, like, of course, it's about the utilization and the enhancement of an athlete's potential, but at the same time, just the ability to play. I think there is that separation, and I can speak for myself. I played baseball at quite a high level. Actually, one of my coworkers is on the call here with me today. We were just chatting about that. But the idea is, I only did that because kids in my neighborhood played it baseball. That's how I got introduced to the activity itself. And yes, there's challenges I experienced at the institutional level, but that is what made me feel connected. And I think we oftentimes overlook that and kind of look at how do we structure something, and just wanted to get the group's feedback at how important unstructured spaces are for that same way to not function as in a way where we're assimilating into a system, rather we're kind of integrating and celebrating our uniqueness into it.
Thank you, Nabil. Great point. Great inquiry.
Can I just build on what Nabil said, because I give him one of these. I know that for us, because we work in adaptive sport, parasports generally require specialized equipment. And municipalities, community centers don't generally have that equipment on site. So our athletes rarely, if ever, get a chance to play pickup. It is just not an opportunity that our athletes ever have, unstructured play. The only sports activity that they have is generally a structured practice at a certain time with the same group, with a coach, and there just isn't an opportunity for unstructured play. And so, we're trying to work with municipalities to create drop-in programs that are fully inclusive to people of all physical abilities, and just to give our participants an opportunity to play unstructured sport, and really, again, youth, so much of what you learn about participation in sport and the values and certainly the joy often comes from unstructured play. And so I would just agree with Nabil that really there needs to be unstructured opportunities, not all about a structured program with a coach and looking to drive success within the athletes. So
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to continue, and I'm going to highlight a couple of my next points. They're going to talk about how you can use time and sport for developmental goals, and unstructured play is one of the ways you can do that. To me, it really comes down to the intention of your programming. And if you look at an example like Launchpad, there are programs for what they will call, say, elite basketball players. And those programs and the way they are facilitated are different than kind of the drop-in programs or the leadership development programs. So it really, really depends on the intention of the programmer and the facilitators, right? And we'll get into that. I'll get into that right now. So my last slide was the dominant visions approach versus the interventionist approach. So are we looking to kind of create the same person out of sport, right? When we say sport gives you discipline, sport teaches you resilience. If I'm from the hood, do I need resilience? I've been through quite a bit and I'm still here, right? Or are we looking at it through an interventionist approach? Let's figure out what's needed, right? Even in the case of this young person being an elite athlete, as we were discussing earlier, sometimes they just need to play. Maybe they're stressed out. Maybe they have to work after they go to school to help out in their family. Whatever the need is, are we listening so we can understand those needs? So what I did was I looked at this approach, the dominant visions versus intervention approach, and then I took a quality participation perspective. So quality participation was a framework started in disability sport, and they looked at what is going on with the experiences of those who participate in sport who are disabled, and how do they interpret what a good experience is. And that's inclusive. It would be a big assumption to say that this group benefits from sport the same way that group does. Even though they may, it's an assumption. What the research does is actually go and have interviews and focus groups and case studies to figure out if this is so. And I did this using a community-based approach. So I incorporated young adults in my research so that we can best capture the voices, the narratives of young people. So here is my research question. What are the narratives, the experience of sideline youth involved in sport programs in the GTA? Now, we've got 6 or so narratives, but I wanted to highlight this narrative because I think it speaks to a broad range of those who are participating in sport for development programs. So this was the support seeker. So I did interviews with youth who were in sport programs, did interviews with coaches who had experience in sport programs, and I did interviews with programmers and facilitators. And what we found was there's 2 dimensions of development, inner development and outer development. Most programs look at the inner development, right? If I give you the skill, you should be good. My job here is done. I've taught you how to fish, you're good. What they fail to see is the outer development. The outer development is the mentorship, the connection with others, the network, right? If I want to go to university, if my parents have gone to university, I'm so much more likely to go because my parents know the way. They'll show me the way from an earlier age. They'll open me up to opportunities. They'll know to see, right? If my parents have never experienced that, I need to find someone who has. Sport is an arena where you can find someone who has. Modeling, guidance, sharing of experiences. Lastly, I've included the current sport participation of that individual because I think for those who positively and even those who negatively experience sport for development programs, there is a desire to make change. So to kind of give back. So through these narratives, we looked at what are some of the things that influence youth development, especially in sideline youth: money, education, living conditions, family, peer, and employment, right? So we really need to look at those and understand them if we're going to say this program is developmental. How is it developing me in my education? How is it developing me and helping in my living conditions, et cetera, et cetera? It may be helping with all, it may be helping with one or two. So from these narratives and pondering on those social determinants, taking them into account, I created this framework. And in the middle of the framework are stages of development. So it starts at the bottom here, youth are at the center, in building trust. And I want you to reflect back on a sport program, if you didn't take part in sports, maybe a job, maybe a volunteer experience where you had someone mentor, you had someone who cared about you. I was able to play sports at a high level, played in the CFL, and I had a range of coaches. There are many coaches on the football team and a range of personality. And I realized that those coaches who built relationship and trust with players, the players would go to war, proverbial war for them. They would do anything for them and for the team. So think about your own experiences. Do you have leaders, coaches, teachers, mentors who inspired you? Maybe the way they behaved and you saw them navigate through relationships, you said, I need some of that. I don't get that at home, but there's something pulling me towards that. Maybe they went to university, your parents didn't, but they did, and you said, wow, I want to be educated just like that, or something. So building relationship is at the core. And when we talk about building relationship, when you observe and you listen and you create that space, you give youth the opportunity to share. And when they're sharing, you learn more and you learn more and you learn more, whether it's about their culture, whether it's about what they think about themselves and their identity, whether it's their comfort level on a team, whatever it is, when you've developed relationship, you're able to build rapport and have a trusting, open environment. There's no limit to what you can do in terms of development. In contrast, when emotions are not tended to, when mental health is not taken into account, when people are not given space to be themselves, no learning, not much growth can take place. Some of us have experienced that in different settings, right? So that's at the foundation. And as we build, you increase confidence, you're able to build internal personal life skills, you're able to start to teach someone how to fish, but then you're able to provide youth with the confidence to practice support-seeking behavior, help-seeking behavior. There were coaches and facilitators that I interviewed that said, in my home, I was never supported in such a way that I was motivated to go and ask people for help. This may seem familiar to some of us, right? If you do not feel that help and support is there for you, and it's something that you can approach and move towards and seek out yourself, there are a number of resources that you're really missing out on, right? In university and college, there's a department of student mental health, and a lot of students don't access that just because they feel they're unworthy or it's taboo to do so. It's still stigmatized. So once you're able to promote help-seeking behavior, you really open up the potential for youth. And once these inner skills are developed, you can introduce outside resources like networks and fishing rods and fishing groups and people. I run a program with the Dalai Lama School of Public Health where we come in, we build relationships through mentoring, then we introduce profs from U of T. These profs even leave their email addresses so high school youth can connect with university profs. We take them on a tour of U of T, and it's amazing because they're like, wow, like that person looks like me. So now they see themselves on campus and they're like, this is a possibility. I used to think U of T was like way up here and I was way down here. This prof wants to talk to me. This is crazy. This is different, right? And they have a pipeline of resources that they're confident in their ability to navigate through. So I know we just got the message for 5 more minutes, but we're actually finishing in this room. So we're going to continue our conversation. If you have to go, that's completely okay. But I'm going to pass it over to Rime, and Rime is going to speak to parts of this model that resonated with him in his journey to where he is today.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. So when I was younger, I was a pretty, what's the word? Curious kid. I was curious, and I was also pretty good at school. I would call myself a pretty smart kid. However, the one thing that I was a victim to was it was kind of my biggest flaw was I knew I was smart. So in school, I would be the person who was creating havoc, being disruptive and things like that until I was in the 8th grade. Or sorry, actually the 7th grade, and the 7th grade going into the 8th, I had met this one teacher at my school, and he happened to also be the soccer coach, and his name was he was a French teacher, Monsieur Narcisse. And where he kind of fits in this model and into my life is in the building trust aspect. Before I met him, I was young, obviously. However, I was kind of moving to a pretty disruptive, I would say pretty disruptive trajectory, despite the fact that I was in a good school and things like that. I wasn't really interested in working hard, or I wasn't creating any proper, there was not much structure, I guess you could say. And that was until I met him. And he actually, I remember he sat me down, and he would do it countless times throughout the year. And he would kind of walk me through what I needed to do, both in soccer, because he also played soccer at a high level in the Ivory Coast, and also in the classroom. And so with that, we built a very good relationship. He's somebody I still talk to today, and somebody I would call my second father, to be quite honest with you. And he's supported me a lot. And with that, he actually, I think it's fair to say he instilled a lot of confidence and self-belief in myself, and that translated onto the soccer field as well. And the reason I bring soccer up now is because I think that was where I was able to unapologetically express myself and express who I am. And I think that in itself is part of the value that comes with sport, and where that falls into my life and is it allowed me to hone my skills and improve some of my weaknesses, like being collaborative and being a good leader, and exercising these things night in and night out, which essentially translate into my everyday life now, working at MLSE and even in my own friendships and even classroom settings and things like that. So it's pretty interesting when Jonathan introduced this model to me, kind of seeing how the way it connected into my life, and even guidance and counseling, I guess, speaking now speaking in regards to being a Launchpad youth mentor. seeing the value of that, and also in my own life, kind of being able to properly serve, being able to now independently serve myself, and also kind of guide some of the older kids that come through our space, giving them the tools to be able to do that as well, I think is in itself very powerful. Sorry, I'm just kind of going through some of my notes. And yeah, so I think one thing that I think resonated with me in this model was the building relevant skills, and bringing it back to my teacher, Mr. Narcisse. Something that he did was he was able to help me identify some of the skills that I needed to build, and some of the skills that were already built. And so with that, it allowed me to be very successful in high school, and on the soccer field. I played soccer at a pretty high level. However, I had to stop just because financially it started to cost my mom a little too much money. But I was able to kind of see the way having somebody like him, having that person who did instill that self-belief and that confidence, and seeing the way it essentially changed how I would, or the person that I am today, to be quite honest with you. And so seeing that in high school, I took a lot of what he said and I kind of worked with it, and I worked with it quite a bit. And I slowly saw it kind of translate to better outcomes. I started to find myself with better friends. I started to see myself taking up student council and kind of broadening my interest in that respect. And I think that, again, I think that building relevant skills and having that moment, having that person to sit me down and speak to me and ask me what I need and kind of help me identify what I need for my life did in fact support me in my life trajectory. And yeah, back to you, Jonathan.
That was great. Thank you. So I'm just going to say one more thing. We're going to open back the floor. There's some really, really key points here. He talked about identity. He talked about having a voice. He talked about authentically sharing and exploring himself. These may be things that are sometimes taken for granted when we think about what other people are going through. Some households, they don't have space to do that. Some people, maybe even in this call, don't have a space to just be authentically and unapologetically themselves, to explore themselves, to see and try and question and learn, and not be afraid of feeling stupid for asking a stupid question or something like that. So building rapport and building trust is at the core of all this, because sport is an arena where you can do that. In sport, young people are moving, they're actors in a game, they're players, they're participants, and they're already providing a level of vulnerability because they're allowing you to say, hey, maybe we should do this different. Maybe you should dribble with your left hand. Maybe if you did this, and they're welcoming your feedback. So you have the beginnings of the green light to build on that, because coaching someone else is very, very vulnerable. And if someone is allowing you to do that, there is some level of trust. Now, can you build on that? Can you give them space to be themselves? Can you open communications? Can you see where they're at? Even at the pro level, there are times where we get to practice and our practices are super structured, but the coach would start with a game. He'd have everyone laughing and playing like there'd be stupid games like tag, right? You got a bunch of grown guys with shoulder pads and helmets on playing tag, rolling on the ground, laughing like they're 12, right? Because the coach listened to what was going on in the team and realized, hey, these guys are stressed out. We need to just do something fun. And going back to what we're talking about, unstructured play, I think unstructured play is applicable in many, if not all, scenarios. But to really have an impact with that, we've got to be intentional, and we have to be learning, understanding, and observing what's going on with those who participate in our programs. Rime's coach was observant of him. He saw that he was in a place where he's developing, he's a little bit confused, he's questioning, and he allowed him to do that. Then he supported him along the way. Brittany shared, she may not have had someone like that, right? So now you look at yourself. What is your role in your organization? What is your role in the program? Are you writing programs? When you're writing programs and a training for facilitators, is it inclusive of time to build rapport? Is it inclusive of maybe reflective practices where coaches can say, oh yeah, you know what? Rime usually has a lot of energy today, but every day, but today he seems kind of down. Maybe I should speak to him for 5 minutes after. Are you building that time? If you're a facilitator, are you intentionally being aware of what's going on with those you're coaching, those you're leading, right? Are you taking note of everyone's difference? That's diversity, right? That's being inclusive, right? So I'm gonna open up the floor. I'm just gonna check out the chat right here. Okay, that was for Rime. And I think I just saw, was that Nabil? Was that you raising up your hand?
Yeah, just a very good question. I cannot agree more with everything you're saying, Jonathan. It's resonating very close to home. The question I have is, in spaces where a coach can have this potential impact into a life, or a facilitator, how can they become, or how can they be more comfortable having that conversation, right? Sometimes they focus so much on the drill or the activity that they are overlooking some of these really critical elements. Like even in that, key role of facilitators, like mentorship, counseling, like oftentimes this has nothing to do with the activity, it has to do with the relationship. How can facilitators feel comfortable, and what can we do as individuals who are programming those spaces to help those facilitators and coaches?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Rime start with that one, because he's a young coach, really getting into the thick of things. I'm an old guy, so you can get two varying perspectives. Go ahead, Rime.
It's interesting, Nabil. It's funny you say that, because I also coach soccer, and I coach a couple different age groups. I coach some high school teams and also a couple rep teams. And something that I found that works among all age groups, in fact, is honestly starting with opening up yourself, and kind of giving that letting that person know that you as well are willing to be quote unquote vulnerable, and willing to be open. It doesn't necessarily mean that I offer my darkest, deepest secrets to the kids that I coach, because quite frankly, I doubt they care. But I think it does start with kind of the facilitator being willing to open that up, and being observant, and kind of seeing, playing off the energy that the people in front of you kind of offer. It's I think, while being a coach, something that I've kind of picked up in while being a coach of soccer and also Launchpad is the kids mirror, or the people that we serve mirror us. We're the facilitators, and they mirror a lot of what we feel, or a lot of the energy that we have, right? So it starting by maybe establishing that sort of quote unquote space, or that sentiment of community, or togetherness, and things like that do I think, in my opinion at least, and it served me pretty well. I think that would be something to consider, Nabil.
Thank you. And I would add to that is know yourself and get to know yourself. You don't need to know yourself 100%. I don't know if anyone does. I know I'm on the journey of continuously learning more about myself, but I can definitely see a challenge. So say myself working in my first kind of experiences working in this space with disabled athletes, there's a difference. And I'm like, okay, like, do I relate? Am I saying this too much? Am I saying that? Am I using the right words? Am I not? And I just thought about the best ways that I could connect, me personally. Some of us are introverts, right? So maybe the best way to connect is to have a deep conversation on the side. Some of us are extroverts. So maybe the best way to connect is at the end of a practice, a scrimmage, a game, whatever it is, we share a personal story. As Rime said, we're giving them the green light to be open by modeling the behavior. Whatever it is, if we can look inside of ourselves and see, okay, what's the way I connect best? I think it's more comfortable to connect, especially with groups that you may not have the most confidence in connecting with, because you just may not know that much about them. And then once you start to connect on your level, there's a level of comfort and there's a level of genuineness that especially young people feel. Young people know if you're being fake or not. They know it, right? So if you come with a genuine heart and it's just like, hey, like, I've never met anyone from Eritrea. What is it like over there? What's your culture? What kind of foods do you eat? Can you dance? In my culture, we dance. Can you dance? Right? You're just showing interest. And guess what? When you start that, they may not be buying it, right? They may not like it because they're not used to different people, especially adults, giving them positive attention. There's typically something attached to it. So remember, even from a perspective of global sport for development, you're talking about powerful nations giving to smaller nations, where these powerful nations just colonize these nations, right? So it's like, why would I trust you to give me something if we were just freed from your clutches? So it's in a similar vein, youth may look up to you and be like, why would I trust you? So time must be spent to building that. And I think being vulnerable, as Rime said, leading through modeling really helps with developing that rapport and developing that space.
Sorry, Jonathan, just to kind of add to that,
Go ahead.
I think that a lot of times we tend to overlook the importance of giving that time to establish that relationship. But like your model and like you just shared, I think that it goes the distance. Doing that extra bit of understanding this person in front of you and building that relationship and that trust, I think it does go the distance because for example, my 7th grade, 8th grade teacher is somebody that I still speak to pretty regularly, right? And I'm here in my 3rd year of university, and still I feel like I have somebody that I can turn to when I'm in crisis and I have an exam and I have something and I'm like, what do I do? Or if I have a supplementary or something, I think it goes again it goes the distance in having that sort of support, and it creates lasting bonds and lasting support systems.
If I can just add to that, just an anecdotal story to kind of, I really appreciate Rime, the insight. When I also played soccer and had a coach who told me that I never stopped running in a way to kind of highlight a positive skill of mine. So he used to call me Wheels. Um, and I think just an example where that name that highlighted a positive skills of mine, I resonated with that. I led with the fact that, might not have the best shot, can never shoot with my left, but I'm Wheels. I can run. And when you highlight that positive skills, you kind of really resonate. And, he would kind of give those positive affirmations that I'm 36 years old and I'm telling you that story. This is a high school story, right? So to your point, when people are giving you that positive affirmation, willing to learn a little bit about you and highlight your strengths, you feel more confident to work on maybe other parts of your game, your personality, your ability to connect and belong in that community. So even though at this age I am no longer Wheels at all or replicate anywhere near this, but the idea is that helped me belong. That gave me like an identity that was not based on my deficits, right? When you look at the social powers, it's always like what you don't have, it's what somebody else does. But when you're highlighting what you do have, coaches, facilitators, I think the disconnect has been that we have not put the impact that a facilitator can have. We tend to think that you run a basketball program, there's a kid just teaching you how to dribble with your left hand. No, it's to give you that nickname, it's to connect with you, it's to highlight your skill set. And you might never go on to play professionally, but guess what? You're going to remember that and you're going to use that in whatever you do in your life. And I think that is such a critical element that we tend to overlook. But like to everybody's point here, it's so important. We cannot oversee that, and we need to integrate that into our programming.
And Nabil, that was amazing. And I think something you said and I guess I'll reiterate, is even then the beauty of all of that is that confidence translates into life outside of sport. So with that being said, it empowers you to go apply for a school at that age, or apply for a job, or apply for a grant, go talk to new people, join new clubs. All of that, all of those soft skills are then transferred to your everyday life, and thus empower you and empower the people around you even more as well. So um it's interesting, and quite frankly, I believe it is very beautiful in many ways.
So, thank you both for that. A colleague just highlighted, and I was saying disabled athletes. The term to use, a respectable term, is athletes with a disability, right? And that kind of is an example of, is sometimes you may get it wrong. And I apologize if I offended anyone on this call. But if your heart's in the right place, you'll have people who will look out for you like that and correct you when it needs to be done, so that your language is inclusive as well, right? So we all, when your heart is in the right place and you're understanding who you are and using your strengths to help others, including yourself, because as you facilitate any kind of developmental programs, you should be developing too, especially if you're listening to others. Then you have an arena in which so much development can take place. So it's so rich, and learning and development can occur. Great point, Rime. Does anyone else have any questions, any comments, any additions? I keep thinking back to Brittany's share. I wonder if there was just one coach that saw, monitored, observed Brittany struggling a bit, was like, hey, what's up? Talk to me. And said, hey, took interest in who Brittany was as an individual, right? Who Brittany was, not just what Brittany could do for the team or for the coach or for the organization, but what they could do for Brittany. I wonder how that would have changed Brittany's experience in gymnastics, right? And I wonder how the different people in your life have influenced your experience based on small conversations, listening, nicknames, making you feel like you belong. And at the end of the day, when you say support, Rime sharing an 8th grade teacher, the 8th grade teacher isn't going to come to Rime's rescue and do the work or anything for them. But Rime knows in the back of his mind, in the front of his mind, I've got people out there who are rooting for me. I got someone out there who cares. And that goes a tremendously long way when it comes to development, when it comes to growth, when it comes to getting out of a cycle of poverty, and then being able to come back and give back and help others grow with you. Yes, thank you for sharing that, Laura. We always try and see the athlete first and not the disability. Sometimes we're scared to speak for fear of using the wrong language. I know I always appreciate it when someone tells me the correct language to use. We're all learning. There's so much to learn. Yeah, that's a great one. Thank you for your input. All right, any other questions, any other comments? Okay, the coffee option, you can have a coffee with someone from the group, and you email Launchpad and they send you a gift card for like an Uber Eats coffee. Just get your coffee on. If you don't drink coffee, get a tea, get a dessert, get a croissant, whatever it is you like, right? And have a chat. We had the first segment of this talk last week, and I had a few coffees with people this week, and they were pretty cool. Just being able to talk and chat and share some space. So Rime and I would like to thank you for talking and chatting and sharing some space with us. Thank you for the power station that we had. I know we did most of the talking, but I hope that you felt heard. I hope that you learned. I think I learned quite a bit especially from hearing from other people. Really appreciate your engagement, whether it was in the chat, your presence, or having your video on, or really vocalizing your opinions. And I think in the spreadsheet with the coffee chats, my email is there, so feel free to connect, whether it's just to chat and get your share a croissant or a coffee, or if there's any questions or anything that you have about my field, the field and the work that I do. Appreciate you all. Thank you.
I think we will give it off to Brandon now. Brandon, you don't got too much time though.
All good. Thanks, Rime. I'll be quick. Thank you, Jonathan, as well. Thank you both for having an engaging, interactive workshop. I'm going to speak on behalf of everybody in here. It was a really insightful conversation. Thank you for everybody else as well for sharing and adding your inputs based on your own personal experiences. Really appreciate it. I'm just going to share a couple links here to piggyback off of what Jonathan said. So we do have the incentive document where you guys can have virtual coffee chats with one another, connect, share more experiences, and continue the conversation. For those of you who do engage in coffee chats, like Jonathan said, we do have Uber Eats cards that we can provide for you. All you have to do is send MLSE Launchpad an email to say that you connected with a certain individual, and then we'll be able to set that up for you. I also have one more link to share. If you guys would be so inclined to do this post survey, just to let us know your thoughts, anything. Sweet. So anything that you guys learned, I'm not sure if you saw the link I just put in the chat. If not, I'm going to resend it. So we have our post programs, or not program, but our post survey for the workshop that you guys can complete. If you have any thoughts, anything you learned, you want to share with us, it'd be great for us to get some insights. That way we can build and improve for the next workshop we have. Again, thank you for joining. Thank you for coming, participating with us. We look forward to having more opportunities like this with you in the future.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.